I watched my sister's perfectly manicured nails drum against my kitchen table, and I knew exactly what she was going to ask. I'd heard these words before in another lifetime. Mia, I need a huge favor. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me in this impossible second chance. 24 hours ago, I'd been dying in a hospital bed at 42. My teaching career destroyed, my reputation in ruins, facing criminal charges I didn't understand. Then I'd woken up in my 30-year-old body, in my old apartment, with my sister Vanessa sitting across from me wearing that same calculating smile. What kind of favor? I asked, though I already knew. You know how I've been doing those SAT prep classes out of my house? Vanessa leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet. Well, some of the parents are asking for proof of credentials. They want to know their kids are being taught by a real teacher. But I don't have my certification yet. The exam is so expensive and, how tight money's been since Brad's startup needs all our savings. In my first life, I'd felt sorry for her. Vanessa had always been the pretty one, the charming one, but I'd been the smart one. I'd worked my way through college, gotten my master's in education, spent 5 years building my reputation as one of the best English teachers at Westfield High. Meanwhile, Vanessa had married rich, had the perfect Instagram life, and thought she could do anything I could do, only better, and without the hard work. You want to use my teaching license number, I said flatly. Her eyes widened with false innocence. Just for marketing materials, just to show parents I'm qualified. You wouldn't even have to do anything. I just put your license number on my website and promotional stuff. It's not like I'd be pretending to be you or anything illegal. Liar. In my first life, I'd said yes. I'd thought it was harmless. I'd thought it was just to make her flyers look more professional. I'd loved my little sister, and I'd wanted to help her succeed. I hadn't known she was running an unlicensed tutoring mill. I hadn't known she was forging grade reports and guaranteeing SAT score improvements she couldn't deliver. I hadn't known she was charging parents $15,000 per student and providing unqualified instructors, her friends from yoga class, her husband's fraternity brothers, anyone who'd work for cash under the table. And I certainly hadn't known that when the State Board of Education finally investigated, when parents filed complaints, when a reporter from the local news started digging into Westfield's elite prep academy. My license number would be on everything: my license, my reputation, my career. Vanessa had cried and apologized and claimed she didn't know it was wrong. She'd said I should have explained the rules better. She'd let me take the fall while she quietly shut down the operation and moved to California with Brad, leaving me to face the ethics board alone. They'd suspended my license. I'd lost everything I'd worked for. And when I tried to fight back, when I'd tried to prove Vanessa had been running the operation, she'd had Brad's expensive lawyers bury me in paperwork and counterclaims. She'd even suggested to the board that I'd been the one running it, using her house as a cover. The stress had destroyed my health. The legal fees had bankrupted me. I'd died bitter, broken, and alone. But now I was 30 again, and I knew exactly what was coming. Sure, I said, meeting Vanessa's eyes. I'll help you. Her face lit up. Really? Oh my God, Mia, you're the best. I knew I could count on you. What's family for? I said and smiled. Because this time I wasn't going to be a victim. This time, I was going to be the architect of her destruction. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, not the overworked public defender I'd eventually been assigned in my first life, but Marcus Chen, the attorney I should have hired from the beginning. I'd looked him up the day after my rebirth. He was already a partner at his firm, already known for his work in professional ethics cases. Mr. Chen, my name is Mia Winters. I teach at Westfield High. I need to discuss a situation involving my teaching license before it becomes a problem. We met at his office that afternoon. I laid it all out: Vanessa's request, my concerns about how my license might be misused, my desire to protect myself legally. I want to help my sister, I said carefully, but I need documentation that I'm not involved in any business she might run. I need to protect my license. Marcus nodded, his sharp eyes assessing. Smart. Most people don't think about liability until it's too late. Here's what we'll do. By the end of the week, I had written documentation that I'd granted Vanessa permission to reference my credentials for informational purposes only. with explicit language stating I had no involvement in her business operations, would not be providing instruction, and bore no responsibility for her teaching methods or business practices. Marcus had me send it via email and certified mail. Vanessa signed it without reading it carefully, too excited about launching her tutoring empire. "You're so paranoid," she'd laughed. "It's just a little tutoring business. What could possibly go wrong?" Everything I thought, everything is going to go wrong for you. The second thing I did was document everything. I created a private folder on my computer, backed up to 3 different cloud services. Every text message from Vanessa went into screenshots, every email was saved. When she invited me to see her new academy in the converted garage of her McMansion, I went, and I took photos. "This is amazing, Van," I said, watching her show off the folding tables, the whiteboard, the stack of practice SAT books she'd bought in bulk from Amazon. "Isn't it? I've already got 12 honest students signed up for the summer intensive. That's $180,000, Mia. Can you believe it?" I could. I remembered the numbers from the investigative report that had eventually been published in my first life. Vanessa's operation had grossed over $1 million in 18 months before it collapsed. "Who are you getting to teach?" I asked innocently. "Oh, people. Brad knows some guys from college who are good at standardized tests. My friend Stephanie is really good at math. And I'll handle the English sections. I mean, how hard can it be? You just teach them tricks and strategies. No credentials, no background checks, no curriculum. Just people off the street teaching other people's children in exchange for cash." I took photos of the academy. I took photos of the promotional materials with my license number prominently displayed. I took photos of Vanessa's handwritten notes about her pricing structure and her recruiting pitch for instructors. And then I went home and I waited. The thing about Rebirth is that you can't change everything. You can't prevent every mistake. Because the truth is, most of life's tragedies aren't caused by single moments. They're caused by patterns, by character, by the fundamental nature of who people are. Vanessa was always going to be greedy. She was always going to cut corners. She was always going to believe that the rules didn't apply to her because she was special, because she was beautiful, because she'd always gotten away with everything. And I was going to let her. Over the next 6 months, I watched Vanessa's operation grow. She texted me updates constantly, proud of her success, never suspecting that I was documenting every message. "Got 30 students now, this is crazy. Some kid went from a 1200 to a 1580. His parents are so happy. Hired 2 more instructors. Brad's friend Mike is great. He barely charges anything. I saved it all. The boasts about revenue, the admissions about unqualified staff, the screenshots of her website where my license number was listed under Lead Educational Consultant, Mia Winters, MED. I'd never set foot in her academy after that first visit. I'd never taught a single student. But according to her marketing, I was the academic director. In my first life, I hadn't known any of this until it was too late. I'd been busy with my own teaching, trusting that Vanessa was just running a small tutoring business. When parents started complaining, when the investigation started, I'd been blindsided. This time, I knew the timeline. I knew that in month 7, a student named Jason Park would fail to improve his SAT score despite $15,000 in tutoring. I knew his mother, Angela Park, was a lawyer who didn't accept failure. I knew she would start asking questions. And I knew that when she did, she would find something very interesting. I made my move in month 6. "Mr. Chen, I need to file a complaint with the State Board of Education." Marcus looked up from his notes. "About your sister? About the misuse of my license? I've documented everything. I have evidence that she's running an unlicensed educational operation, employing unqualified instructors, and fraudulently representing herself as operating under my credentials." I slid a folder across his desk. It was thick with printouts, screenshots, photographs. 6 months of evidence. Marcus flipped through it, his expression darkening. "Jesus, this is bad." "I know, that's why I need to report it before it gets worse, before someone gets hurt." I paused. "Before it reflects on me. You understand that your sister could face serious consequences? Fines, potential criminal charges for fraud." "I understand. but I have to protect my license, my career. That's more important than protecting someone who's breaking the law. I met his eyes. Even if she's family. Especially because she's family, I thought, but didn't say. Because she would have thrown me under the bus without a second thought. She did throw me under the bus. Marcus nodded slowly. All right, let's do this right. We'll file the complaint, but we'll also file a concurrent statement documenting that you became aware of the misuse and immediately reported it. That should protect you from any liability. Perfect. We spent the next week preparing the complaint. Every piece of evidence carefully organized and annotated, a timeline of events, witness statements from parents I'd quietly contacted, asking careful questions about their experience with Westfield Elite Prep Academy. And then we sent it to the State Board of Education. The investigation, I knew, would take about 6 weeks to ramp up, which meant it would be in full swing right around the time Angela Park started making noise about her son's scores. Perfect timing. I didn't tell Vanessa what I'd done. I just kept being the supportive big sister. When she texted asking about teaching strategies, I gave her advice. When she complained about difficult parents, I sympathized. When she bragged about her revenue, I congratulated her. And all the while, the state board was building its case. I knew the investigator assigned to the case, Sharon Mitchell. In my first life, she'd been the one to interview me, to look at me with disappointment and ask how a respected teacher could be involved in such a blatant fraud. I'd been devastated by her disapproval. This time, I met her for coffee in week 3 of the investigation. Ms. Winters, thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course, I want to cooperate fully. I slid another folder across the table. I've prepared a complete statement of my involvement, or lack thereof. I've also included all communications between myself and my sister regarding the use of my license. Sharon opened the folder, scanning the contents. I watched her eyebrows rise. You documented all of this? I had a bad feeling from the beginning. I work with teenagers. I'm used to protecting myself from liability. I made sure everything was in writing. And you never actually worked at this academy? Never. I've never met any of the students, never been present during instruction, never received any compensation. My sister asked to use my credentials for marketing purposes. I gave written permission with specific limitations. She exceeded those limitations without my knowledge. That last part was a lie. I'd known exactly what she was doing, but Sharon didn't need to know that. She's your sister, Sharon said carefully. This must be difficult for you. I met her eyes. My license represents 15 years of education and professional development. My sister's choices don't erase my responsibility to my students and to this profession. If she's breaking the law, she needs to face the consequences. Sharon nodded, and I saw respect in her expression. Not everyone would be willing to cooperate against a family member. Oh, if only you knew, I thought. If only you knew how much I'd been looking forward to this. The investigation accelerated faster than even I had predicted. Sharon didn't just look into Vanessa's operation, she dug deep. She interviewed parents, she interviewed the unqualified instructors who panicked when they realized they might face legal consequences and immediately turned on Vanessa, providing statements about how she'd assured them there were no legal requirements for SAT tutoring. She subpoenaed financial records and found that Vanessa had grossed nearly $800,000 in 8 months, none of it properly reported to the IRS. She discovered that several of the instructors had criminal records that would have disqualified them from working with minors if Vanessa had bothered to do background checks. And she found something I hadn't known about in my first life. 2 students had filed complaints about inappropriate behavior by one of Brad's fraternity brothers. Vanessa had paid the parents to keep quiet rather than fire the instructor. When Sharon came back to me with this information, even I was shocked. She paid hush money? $15,000 to each family. Apparently, the instructor made sexual comments to female students. Nothing physical, but enough to make them uncomfortable. Your sister's response was to silence the victims rather than remove the perpetrator. I felt sick. In my first life, Vanessa had destroyed my career, but this was so much worse than I'd remembered. I didn't know, I said honestly. I had no idea it was this bad. I believe you. Your cooperation has been invaluable. Sharon closed her notebook. Ms. Winters, I want you to know that the board will be issuing a statement clearing you of any wrongdoing. Your license is not in jeopardy. In fact, we appreciate your professionalism in reporting this matter. Relief flooded through me, real relief, not just the satisfaction of revenge. Because even though I'd known this time would be different, part of me had still feared that somehow history would repeat itself, that somehow Vanessa would find a way to make this my fault. But she couldn't, not with 6 months of documentation, not with Marcus Chen defending me, not with the state board on my side. This time, the only person going down was Vanessa. The hammer fell on a Tuesday. I was in my classroom grading essays when my phone buzzed. Vanessa, MIA. Call me right now. Then another text. What the fuck did you do? And another. The state board is shutting me down. They said you filed a complaint. I stared at the messages, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I didn't call. Instead, I texted back, I protected my license. You misused it. There will be consequences. My phone rang immediately. I declined the call. It rang again, declined, again. Finally, I turned my phone off and went back to grading essays. The fallout was spectacular. The state board issued a cease and desist order, shutting down Westfield Elite Prep Academy immediately. Vanessa was ordered to refund all tuition payments and was banned from operating any educational business in the state. The local news picked up the story. Unlicensed tutoring mill shut down after fraud investigation. My license number appeared in the early reports, but the follow-up clarified that I had been the whistleblower, not the perpetrator. Parents filed lawsuits. The total damages claimed exceeded $2 million. The IRS launched its own investigation into Vanessa's unreported income, and Brad, perfect, successful Brad, filed for divorce. Apparently, when your wife's fraud costs you your savings and subjects you to federal investigation, love doesn't conquer all. Vanessa tried to reach me dozens of times. Calls, texts, emails. She even showed up at my apartment, but I'd expected that. I had Marcus send her a cease and desist letter. Contact me again and I'd file for a restraining order. She went to our parents, spinning a story about how I'd sabotaged her out of jealousy, but I'd prepared for that too. I'd already shown them the evidence, the documentation of her fraud, the statements from parents, the news articles. Even our mother, who'd always favored Vanessa, couldn't argue with facts. Why would you do this to your sister? Mom asked me, her voice tired. She did it to herself, I said. Otherwise, I just made sure I didn't go down with her. And that was true. In my first life, I'd been collateral damage. This time, I'd been the bomb. 6 months after the shutdown, I ran into Stephanie, one of Vanessa's former instructors, at a coffee shop. Oh my God, Mia, I didn't know if I should say hi. It's fine. I gestured to the seat across from me. How are you? Stephanie sat, looking uncomfortable. I just want you to know I had no idea what Vanessa was doing was illegal. She told me it was all above board. I never would have. I know, you gave a statement to the investigator. I read it. Did you really report her? Everyone says you did, but Vanessa keeps claiming she was set up by a rival company or something. Of course she did. Vanessa could never accept responsibility for anything. I reported the misuse of my license, I said calmly. What happened after that was the result of the investigation. If she'd been running a legitimate operation, there wouldn't have been anything to find. Stephanie nodded slowly. She's pretty messed up right now. I heard she's waitressing at that Italian place on Main Street. Brad took everything in the divorce. I took a sip of my latte, feeling nothing but satisfaction. Don't you feel bad at all? I mean, she's your sister. I met Stephanie's eyes. She would have let me take the fall. She would have destroyed my career to save herself. I know this because... I paused, choosing my words carefully. Because I know her better than anyone. That was as close as I could come to the truth. Because I couldn't tell anyone that I'd lived this before, that I'd died because of Vanessa's choices, that this wasn't revenge, it was justice. Stephanie left looking troubled. I finished my coffee and went home. A year after my rebirth, my life was better than it had ever been. I'd gotten a promotion to head of the English department at Westfield High. The administration had been impressed by my professional integrity in handling the situation with my sister. Apparently, refusing to protect family members who broke the law was seen as a sign of strong character. I'd started a legitimate SAT prep program through the school, offering low-cost tutoring to students who couldn't afford private services. The local paper did a feature on it, praising my commitment to education and ethical practices. My reputation had never been better. I'd even started dating Marcus Chen. It had started professionally. He'd handled all the legal aspects of the state board investigation. But somewhere along the way, respect had turned into attraction. He was smart, ethical, and he appreciated my ruthless commitment to protecting my career. We made sense. Vanessa, meanwhile, was working 3 jobs to pay off her debt. The lawsuits had been settled, but even with Brad taking half the liability in the divorce, she owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. She'd filed for bankruptcy, but that didn't discharge the fraud penalties. I heard through our mother that she'd applied to community college, thinking she might actually get her teaching credentials legitimately this time. The application had been rejected. Turns out that when you have a record with the State Board of Education for running a fraudulent tutoring operation, they don't let you become a licensed teacher. Ironic, really. The final piece of closure came 18 months after my rebirth. I was at our parents' house for Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd resumed now that I didn't have to worry about running into Vanessa. She'd been uninvited after the scandal, and she'd moved across the state to escape the local notoriety. "Mia, we need to talk about something," Dad said as Mom cleared the dishes. I tensed. "Okay." "It's about Vanessa. She's been asking if you'd be willing to meet with her. She says she wants to apologize." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Apologize? Now, after everything? Mom sat down, looking uncomfortable. "She's in therapy. Her therapist suggested she make amends with the people she's hurt. She's written you a letter." She slid an envelope across the table. My name was written on the front in Vanessa's flowery handwriting. I didn't open it. "What does she want?" "She says she understands now that what she did was wrong. She says she's sorry for putting your license at risk. She wants a chance to explain herself, to try to rebuild your relationship." "No." Dad frowned. "Mia, she's your sister. People make mistakes. She didn't make a mistake, Dad. She committed fraud. She endangered children. She nearly destroyed my career, and she would have let me take the blame for all of it. The only reason she's sorry now is because she got caught." "She's family," Mom said quietly. "So am I, but she didn't care about that when she was using my credentials to run her scam." I stood up, leaving the letter on the table. If Vanessa wants to make amends, she can live a better life. But I don't owe her forgiveness. I don't owe her a relationship. I don't owe her anything. I left before they could argue further. In the car, I thought about the letter. Part of me was curious about what Vanessa had written, what kind of apology she'd crafted, whether she'd finally taken responsibility, or whether it was just more manipulation. But I didn't need to know. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need closure from her, because I'd already gotten my closure. I'd gotten my second chance at life, and I'd used it to ensure that the person who'd destroyed me in my first life faced the consequences of her actions in this one. That was enough. 5 years after my rebirth, I stood in front of the State Board of Education, accepting an award for excellence in teaching and professional ethics. Ms. Winters has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to the integrity of our profession, Sharon Mitchell said as she presented the award. When faced with a difficult situation involving her own family, she chose to uphold the standards of our profession rather than protect a loved one from the consequences of their actions. This is the kind of courage and integrity we need in education. The audience applauded. I smiled, accepting the crystal plaque. Afterwards, at the reception, Sharon pulled me aside. "I have to tell you something," she said quietly. "When I first started investigating your sister's case, I had my doubts about you. The initial complaint was filed so quickly after you gave her permission to use your license. It seemed almost too convenient." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" It felt like you knew what was going to happen, like you were setting her up. Sharon took a sip of her wine. But then I saw all your documentation, the way you'd protected yourself from the beginning. And I realized that you weren't setting her up. You were just smart enough to see it coming. I held her gaze, keeping my expression neutral. I knew my sister. I knew she'd cut corners if given the chance. I just made sure I wouldn't be implicated when she did. Sharon nodded. Smart. Most people don't think that way. They trust family, and it costs them. She paused. But not you. You protected yourself first. That's survival instinct. That's self-preservation, I corrected. There's a difference between surviving and thriving. I chose to thrive. And I had. In my first life, I'd been a victim of my sister's greed and my own naivety. I'd died broken and bitter. In this life, I'd been the architect of her downfall and my own success. I'd used the unfair advantage of my rebirth not to change Vanessa's nature, because that was impossible, but to ensure I wasn't collateral damage when she inevitably self-destructed. Sharon raised her glass. To thriving, then. I clinked my glass against hers. To thriving. That night, Marcus and I sat on the balcony of our apartment. We'd moved in together 6 months ago, and I told him about Sharon's comment. She suspected I set Vanessa up, I said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Did you? I considered the question. In a way, yes. I'd known what would happen. I'd documented everything. I'd filed the complaint at exactly the right time to maximize the damage. But I hadn't made Vanessa commit fraud. I hadn't forced her to hire unqualified instructors or pay hush money to parents or evade taxes. I hadn't created her choices. I'd just ensured I wouldn't be destroyed by them. I protected myself, I said finally. Everything else was her choice. Marcus nodded. Then that's all that matters. He took my hand. You know what I admire most about you? You don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. You assess situations clearly and act decisively. That's rare. I leaned against his shoulder, feeling content. In my first life, I'd been alone when I died. I'd had no one who understood me, no one who respected my ruthlessness. But in this life, I'd found someone who appreciated exactly who I was. Someone who didn't need me to be soft or forgiving. Someone who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to cut out the people who'd destroy you. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices? I asked. Marcus considered this. Sometimes, but I think we all end up where we're supposed to be. Every choice leads to the next. Every decision shapes who we become. I thought about my rebirth, about the impossible gift I'd been given, a second chance to make different choices. But the truth was, I hadn't made different choices. I'd made the same choices with different information. I'd still helped my sister. I'd still given her access to my license. The only difference was that this time I'd known exactly where it would lead and I'd made sure I was protected. Was that manipulation? Was it revenge? Was it justice? Maybe it was all three. Maybe it didn't matter. Do you have any regrets? Marcus asked. I thought about Vanessa, working 3 jobs, struggling to pay off debt, banned from the career she'd wanted. I thought about how she'd tried to apologize, how she'd asked for forgiveness. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel conflicted. I felt free. No, I said, and no regrets. And I meant it. 10 years after my rebirth, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Mia, it's Vanessa. I hadn't heard her voice in years. It sounded older, tired. How did you get this number? Mom gave it to me. I know you said you didn't want contact, but I needed to tell you something. I waited. I'm getting married to a man named David. He's a teacher, a real one, with a license and everything. He knows about my past. He knows what I did, and he loves me anyway. Congratulations, I said neutrally. I'm not asking you to come to the wedding. I know you won't. I wanted you to know that I'm okay, that I rebuilt my life, that I learned from my mistakes. Good for you. Mia, her voice cracked. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I looked out at the view from my office at Westfield High. I was principal now, the youngest in the district's history. I thought about my career, my reputation, my life with Marcus. I thought about everything I'd built in this second chance. And I thought about the woman I'd been in my first life. Broken, destroyed, dying alone because of Vanessa's choices. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday, but not today. That's fair. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. I understand why you reported me. I understand why you don't want me in your life. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I hurt you. Okay. That's all I wanted to say. Take care of yourself, Mia. She hung up. I sat there for a long moment processing. This was something that hadn't happened in my first life. Vanessa taking accountability. Vanessa rebuilding legitimately. Vanessa actually learning. Maybe my revenge had taught her something. Maybe facing real consequences had changed her in a way that getting away with it never would have. Or maybe this was just part of her manipulation. Maybe she was still the same person, just better at hiding it. I'd never know for sure, and that was okay. Because whether Vanessa had truly changed or not didn't affect my life anymore. She was a closed chapter, a problem solved, a threat neutralized. I deleted her number from my call history and went back to work. 15 years after my rebirth, I published a book, Protecting Your Professional License, An Educator's Guide to Ethics and Liability. It became required reading in teacher preparation programs across the state. The chapter on family boundaries and conflicts of interest was particularly popular. I didn't use real names, but anyone who knew my story could read between the lines. The case study about a teacher whose sister misused her credentials was drawn directly from my experience. Both lives combined into one cautionary tale. The book's success led to speaking engagements. I traveled to conferences, talking to educators about professional ethics, about protecting themselves legally, about the importance of documentation. And always someone would ask, how did you have the courage to report your own sister? I'd perfected my answer over the years. It wasn't courage, it was self-preservation. My license represented everything I'd worked for. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even family, destroy that. You can love someone and still protect yourself from them. In fact, sometimes that's the most important thing you can do. The audiences always nodded. They understood. Because most people had someone in their lives who'd taken advantage, who'd asked for just one favor that turned into a disaster, who'd expected family loyalty to override common sense. My story gave them permission to say no, to protect themselves, to choose their careers over destructive relationships. And if my motivation was more complicated than simple self-preservation, if it was also revenge for a life they didn't know I'd lived, well, that was my secret. 20 years after my rebirth, I attended our father's funeral. Vanessa was there, of course. She looked older, we both did, but she'd aged better than she had in my memories of my first life. She wasn't bitter or broken. She was calm, settled, apparently genuinely happy. We stood on opposite sides of the gathering, acknowledging each other with a nod but maintaining our distance. After the service, Mom pulled me aside. "Your father always hoped you two would reconcile," she said. "I know. It's been 20 years, Mia. Don't you think it's time?" I looked across the room at Vanessa, who was talking to her husband and their teenage son, a child I'd never met, a nephew I'd never know. "No," I said. "I don't," Mom sighed. "You're so hard. You always were. Even as a child, once someone crossed you, you never forgave them." She meant it as a criticism, but I heard it as a compliment. "I know who I am," I said. "And I'm okay with it." 25 years after my rebirth, I received a letter. It was from the State Board of Education, informing me that they were renaming their Professional Ethics Award. It would now be called the Mia Waisa Winters Award for Professional Integrity. Your exemplary career and unwavering commitment to ethical standards have set the benchmark for educators in this state. The letter read, "We can think of no better way to honor your legacy than to name our highest ethics recognition after you." I held the letter, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. In my first life, my name had been associated with scandal, with fraud, with professional disgrace. In this life, my name was synonymous with integrity, all because I'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance, and I'd used it to ensure that the person who'd destroyed me would face justice instead. Was I a hero? No. Heroes don't let people walk into traps just to watch them fall. Was I a villain? Maybe, but I'd saved my own life, even if no one else knew it needed saving. Was I at peace? Finally, yes. I called Marcus to tell him about the award. He was retired now, we both were, and we spent our days traveling, teaching the occasional seminar, enjoying the life we'd built together. "They're naming an award after you," he said, laughing. "That's incredible." "It's ironic," I said. "If things had gone differently." "But they didn't. You made sure of that." I smiled. I did. That night, I dreamed about my first life, about dying in that hospital bed, bitter and alone, about Vanessa visiting me once, bringing flowers and apologies that meant nothing. But when I woke up, I was 75 years old in a comfortable bed, next to a man who loved me, in a life I'd fought for and won. The dream faded. This was reality now. This was the life I'd chosen, and I regretted nothing. 30 years after my rebirth, I received word that Vanessa had died. Heart attack. Sudden. She was 72. Her son called to inform me, professional and polite. "I know you two weren't close, but I thought you should know. Mom always spoke about you. She said you were the smartest person she'd ever known." "Thank you for telling me," I said. I didn't go to the funeral. Marcus asked me if I wanted to talk about it, but I didn't. There was nothing to say. Vanessa had lived her life, and I'd lived mine, and they'd diverged the moment I decided to protect myself instead of her. But that night, I did something I hadn't done in 3 decades. I pulled out the old files from the investigation, the evidence I'd gathered, the documentation that had saved my career and destroyed hers. I read through it all, remembering the fear I'd felt in my first life, the determination I'd felt in my second, the cold satisfaction of watching everything unfold exactly as I'd known it would. And I thought about what I'd told Sharon Mitchell all those years ago. Everything else was her choice. That was still true. Vanessa had chosen to commit fraud. She'd chosen to misuse my license. She'd chosen to prioritize money over ethics, to cut corners, to put children at risk. All I'd done was make sure I didn't go down with her. Was that wrong? Was I supposed to have warned her, saved her from herself, sacrificed my own protection to give her a chance to stop? Maybe in some other life, some other version of me would have done that. But I'd already lived through the alternative. I'd already died because of her choices. I'd earned my ruthlessness. I'd earned my second chance. And I'd used it exactly the way I'd needed to. I put the files away. I wouldn't need them anymore. Vanessa was gone. The last tie to my old life, the last reminder of who I'd been before my rebirth, was finally severed. I was free. 35 years after my rebirth, I wrote my final book. Second Chances, Making the Most of Every Opportunity. It was part memoir, part professional advice. I couldn't tell the truth about my rebirth. No one would believe it. But I could write about the importance of learning from mistakes, about recognizing patterns, about protecting yourself when you see disaster coming. The book became a bestseller. People loved the story of how I'd overcome family betrayal to build a successful career. They loved the practical advice about documentation and professional boundaries. They loved the message that it was okay to put yourself first, even when it meant cutting out toxic people. What they didn't know was that every lesson in the book had been learned twice. Once through suffering and death, once through calculated revenge. But that was okay. The truth didn't matter. The outcome did. And the outcome was that I'd lived a full, successful, satisfying life. I'd built a career, a reputation, a legacy. I'd found love and partnership. I'd helped countless other educators protect themselves from the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. I'd won. Not against Vanessa. She'd been collateral damage in my victory over fate itself. I'd won against the universe that had killed me once. I'd won against the timeline that had destroyed me. I'd won against every force that said I couldn't change my destiny. And I'd won because I'd been smart enough, ruthless enough, and patient enough to let my enemy destroy herself while I watched from a safe distance. 40 years after my rebirth, I lay in a hospital bed. I was 90 years old. Marcus had died 2 years earlier. My career was long over. My legacy was secure, and I was dying again. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't filled with regrets. I wasn't dying with the taste of injustice in my mouth. I was dying satisfied. A nurse came in to check my vitals. "Is there anyone you'd like us to call, Ms. Winters?" I shook my head. I had friends, former colleagues who'd visit if I asked, but I didn't need them. I'd already said my goodbyes to the people who mattered. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." She nodded sympathetically and left me alone. I closed my eyes, feeling my body shutting down. The process was familiar now. I'd done this before, but the emotions were completely different. In my first life, I'd died thinking about everything I'd lost, everything Vanessa had taken from me, everything I'd never get back. In this life, I was dying thinking about everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd protected, everything I'd built from the ashes of my first life. I'd used my rebirth perfectly. I hadn't wasted a single day of my second chance. I'd taken the knowledge of my first life and weaponized it, turning my sister's betrayal into her downfall and my triumph. Was it revenge? Yes. Was it justice? Also, yes. Was it wrong? I'd never thought so. And even now, facing death again, I still didn't. Vanessa had made her choices. I'd made mine. The only difference was that I'd made mine with the benefit of foresight. And if that was cheating, if knowing the future and using it to destroy someone who would have destroyed me was somehow unfair, well, I didn't care. Life wasn't fair. Life had killed me once because I'd been too trusting, too naive, too willing to help someone who didn't deserve it. Life had given me a second chance, and I'd used it to ensure I'd never be that vulnerable again. No regrets. As my consciousness started to fade, I thought about what might come next. Would there be another rebirth, another chance, another timeline to navigate? I hoped not. This life had been enough. I'd done what I needed to do. But if there was another life, another chance, another opportunity to rewrite my story, well, I knew exactly what I'd do. I'd protect myself first, always. Because I'd learned the most important lesson anyone could learn. Trust is a luxury. Documentation is survival. And revenge, when properly executed, is indistinguishable from justice. My last thought before the darkness took me was of Vanessa, 30 years in the ground, her legacy erased by scandal. And me, about to join her in death, my legacy secure as an icon of professional integrity. I'd won. And that was enough. The end.